section, and if the sound is a little odd, it's because I'm recording using the built-in microphone on my computer, not my auxiliary microphone, because I'm out of town this week. You might hear some background noise, so pardon me for that. But I wanted to get this recorded and make it available for you. So we're in the end of Jeremiah, and we're going through Lamentations. So you're going to get through one more book and then get into Ezekiel. So you're going to get close to 3 books in the coming week. Good for you guys. I'm proud of you for continuing in the Word. It's important. Here's our familiar slide just to orient us and where we're at as we're making our way through the Old Testament. Chronologically, we're just at the end of basically 586. We're looking at the few years before the 586 and the few years after. And of course, 586 is a pivotal year in the history of God's people, in that it was the year that the temple was destroyed and the remnant of God's people in Judah and Benjamin were taken into exile in Babylon. So when we finish, we'll be finishing up Jeremiah, a prophet to the southern kingdom, and then we'll be looking at Lamentations and Ezekiel, which are happening during the exile period. We've seen this chart before. This one shows the relationship between the prophets. Call these the major prophets because they have big books and no other reason than that. Lamentation is written probably right after the fall of Jerusalem, which happened in August of 586. And then Ezekiel kind of spans that period of time from just before to just after the exile. And you'll see Ezekiel, he's more like Isaiah, in the sense that he breaks up easily into 2 major sections, and also, like Isaiah, has quite a bit of encouragement for the people in exile. When we look at Ezekiel, again, we notice he's kind of unique. He's the first one that we've seen that's writing to Jews that are in Babylon. It's really a message to the whole house of Israel, not just Judah, but both the northern and southern tribes. We'll see his dates there, again, span a pretty long period of time. And the historical background is in Daniel. He's contemporary of Daniel. His ministry spans the end of Jeremiah and into Daniel. He and Daniel are about the same age, as I'll show you here in a minute. Here's where we're at in Jeremiah this coming week. So Jeremiah 52 is the discussion, is the conclusion of the book, and the fall of Jerusalem. So that's what we see there. We've seen this in 2 Kings 25, 2 Chronicles 36 as well. We see it again in Jeremiah chapter 52. So it's, again, a significant event in the history of God's people, a significant demonstration of God's faithfulness, which we'll see in Lamentations as well, and really pivotal in our understanding of the Old Testament and on our understanding of God. So you'll finish up with that destruction of Jerusalem and the aftermath that came with that, impacts to Zedekiah and the rest of the leadership in Jerusalem, as well as the people. And then you'll move into the book of Lamentations, and it's really a book of grief over Jerusalem's destruction. It's only 5 chapters, and I'll discuss those chapters a little in the next slide. Just wanted to give you an overview of what's coming, destruction first of Jerusalem's desolation, then God's anger. We see really Jeremiah grieving deeply over what's happened to his nation and to this city. And then we see another declaration of God's anger. And then Jeremiah prays for restoration. And this is all happening contemporary with the fall of Jerusalem. Let's look a bit more closely at Lamentations here. It's really a funeral song. We call it a dirge today. Even the apparent meter, that is the rhythm that's inherent in the book itself, suggests that it's a dirge or a funeral song. The first 4 chapters are an acrostic. You know, we ran into this before in the Psalm 119. And as you recall there, an acrostic begins with each letter of the Hebrew alphabet successively. And so it starts with Aleph, and it goes right to the end as if we were going from A to Z. In the first couple chapters, in chapter 4, basically has 2 verses per letter. Chapter 3, though, is a little bit more extensive. It has 3 verses per letter. So the couple things we could draw from the fact that it's an acrostic and so regular in its meter and so regular in the number of verses associated with each of the letters is that it's really carefully made. This is thoughtful and emotionally rich. It's Jeremiah has invested himself, all his mind, emotion, and will into creating this mourning over Jerusalem. And as with Psalm 119, the acrostic form of what we're how it's shaped suggests just the fullness of the grief. You know, it's grief from A to Z, we'd say. It also aids in the memorization of this. So just like Psalm 119 may have been made for memorization, so Lamentations. Again, the idea here is that the fall of Jerusalem is so pivotal, such a testimony to the faithfulness of God, that it should not and will not be forgotten. And we see that in the history of Israel, where this book of Lamentations has been recited on the anniversary of Jerusalem's destruction in August of 586. So the anniversary of it was just a few days ago this past week. Also, we see the centrality of the event that's lamented here, the destruction of Jerusalem. You know, the whole book of Jeremiah anticipates God's judgment on Jerusalem up until chapter 52. It's all a anticipation. Then chapter 52 of Jeremiah and the book of Lamentations looks back, records that and looks back on the destruction. So Jeremiah, his writing, his book after his name, as well as Lamentations, is really centered in God's judgment on the faithless nation. The book of Jeremiah anticipates it. Lamentation looks back to it. So Jeremiah's central focus is on the fall of this great city. As I said, it may be the saddest book in the whole Bible. It's a very tragic event that it commemorates and remembers and laments. However, it's startling, I think, that right in the middle of this book is this testimony of God's faithfulness. It's a great couple verses to memorize here, great couple verses to call on when you're sensing tragedy in your own life. Let me just read those for you. The Lord's loving kindnesses indeed never cease, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Some translation says, "Great is your faithfulness, O Lord." It's just startling in this book of such deep sadness to come upon these verses that speak of God's loving kindnesses. And these things never failing, even in the midst of Jerusalem's horrible destruction. We're talking about not only the razing of the city, the razing of the temple, but possibly thousands of lives, uh, Israelite lives lost by this. I think what we learn from this verse is that God's faithfulness works two ways. On the one hand, since he has said that he will bring judgment on the faithlessness of his people, and again, go back to Deuteronomy 28, 16 through 68, delineates severe judgment that's going to come, deadly judgment on Israel in Jerusalem. On the other hand, Deuteronomy 28, 1 to 15, also anticipates God's great blessing on a faithful people. So, this faithfulness to both his blessings and his cursing gives confidence that just as God brought a deadly judgment on Israel and Jerusalem, he will also bring restoration to his covenant people. Again, his faithfulness cuts both ways. He's faithful to curse and he's faithful to bless. And as Jeremiah surveys the scene of Jerusalem's destruction, and as you'll see when you read Lamentations, dead bodies in the streets, he's going to remember that God was faithful to bring this destruction as he said he would, and therefore he can be trusted to be faithful to bring restoration as he said he would. And I'll just point out, as is my habit, that God's promise of destruction and his promises of blessing are contingent upon a literal understanding of his word. So that's Lamentations. We go over to Ezekiel, longer book, another book of, I think I maybe left that in there. Let me back up. Grief over Jerusalem's destruction. We see that here. And like Isaiah is divided into chapters 1 to 39 of God's wrath and 40 to 66 of restoration, so Ezekiel is divided between a section of condemnation and then a section of hope or consolation. Your reading this week will take you through Ezekiel's call and commission, and partway through his pronouncement and explanation of the judgment on Judah. He also has an extensive section on the judgment on the nations around Jerusalem, around Israel, and it's interesting when we get there, you'll see that the judgment goes nation by nation in a kind of clockwise pattern around the nation of Israel. And then it closes with an extensive section talking about the future restoration of the nation. Lots of controversy about what that means. I'll give you, of course, my view and the other views as well as we get to that section. If we look at this book theologically, that is, we try to see what God is doing, what it tells us about God, we see that God in his grace and his mercy has provided Jeremiah as well as the other prophets. So God's hand is on him, God's word is being spoken by him, and God's message is being communicated through Ezekiel, even down to our own day, even down to today, because, of course, chapters 33 to 48 are yet future, as we'll see. We'll see also that in this area of judgment on Judah, we'll see God's glory. And when I talk about his glory, I'm talking about the physical manifestation of his presence in the temple. This is a Shekinah glory, a kind of a luminescence in the temple that was visible. And this glory leaves the temple, departs from the Holy of Holies, over the threshold, goes east, pauses above the Mount of Olives, and then leaves. We see that in chapters 4 through 24, God's glory departing and the explanation of why that happens. And we see God's judgment on the nations. Again, this is a way, among other things, for God to assert his sovereignty. And this is necessary because if he is going to restore the nation, which is the next section, and his glory is going to return to Jerusalem, and it will in the person of Christ, if that is going to happen, then God has got to be sovereign over the nations. And that's what Ezekiel tells us in chapters 25 to 32, that he is in fact sovereign. You could see the scope of Ezekiel's ministry here from before the siege, just 592. If you recall, there were kind of successive exiles, successive three attacks on Jerusalem in 605, 597, and ultimately 586. So the first section here is before the siege of Jerusalem. During the judgment on the nations is during the siege of Jerusalem. And finally, we have ministry after the siege. I'll let you look at the rest of that slide. But again, God's faithfulness, again, is this double-edged sword that we need to be aware of and that Ezekiel talks quite a bit about. His name itself means God strengthens or strengthened by God. He's kind of a unique name. He was born about the same time as Daniel in 622 BC and was, as I said, taken into captivity in that second attack in exile on Jerusalem. So the first was in 605, which was Daniel, Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, his three friends. They were taken in that first exile. And then Ezekiel was taken in the second, which would put him about 25 years old when he went into exile and about 30 years old when he was commissioned in chapters 1 through 4, which you'll read this week. So his prophetic ministry lasted from about 592 to 570. Again, catching the last part of Jeremiah's ministry and the first part of Daniel's. He's kind of a bridge. As I said, he's about the same age as Daniel, but that puts them both just slightly younger than Jeremiah, about 20 years. We see in Ezekiel that Daniel was already a well-known figure in Babylon by the time Ezekiel began his ministry. And Daniel himself is actually mentioned in the book of Ezekiel 3 times. So that makes Ezekiel, again, a contemporary of both Jeremiah and Daniel. What a rich time of revelation from God that surrounded this destruction of the temple. Ezekiel, as far as we can tell, died in about 560 BC. So his death occurred about 10 years after his ministry ended. There's a few things to watch for. Ezekiel can be a daunting book sometimes. There's lots of signs, visions, and parables. So we have in the book 9 different signs in the first, in that section about the judgment. And then there's a 10th sign in chapter 37. So be on the lookout for these signs. These are physical signs. For example, the death of Ezekiel's wife is a sign of the coming destruction of Jerusalem. It's a confirmatory sign. What a tragic thing that Ezekiel experienced, and God didn't let him off the hook with the death of his wife, as a grievous situation that might have been, but he continued in his ministry. He also has several visions throughout the book. Some are very hard to understand, hard to comprehend what Ezekiel's looking at. It does cause people to sometimes throw up their hands in frustration, but just be aware, and I'll talk about that in a second here, that these visions occur periodically throughout the book and are real things that Ezekiel saw. He described them as best he could, and I'm pretty convinced that the original readers knew what he was talking about. And as we go through the book, I'll discuss that a little bit more. In addition to signs and visions, he also has 6 parables throughout the book. So these are stories with a significant spiritual meaning, an everyday story. So as I said, it's difficult sometimes to see what he is seeing in some of his visions, and difficult for us to understand what they mean. But I'm pretty sure that the original readers knew what he was talking about. When, for example, in chapter 4, and he sees this great storm coming down upon him, he is using language that Baal worshippers would have understood. And they would immediately have made the connection that this storm that we associate with Baal is really a storm that is from God, that Baal is nothing. And they would have picked that up right away. So it's difficult for us, this is about 2,700 years later, and we don't have the same social or cultural background. That's why we have teachers of God's Word that help us bridge that cultural gap. So it's difficult for us, but his original readers knew what he meant. When you come across these sections in Daniel, there's a real tendency to want to spiritualize them or turn them into some kind of allegory. And, resist doing that. When Daniel says he sees a storm, don't spiritualize that into, say, a storm of adversity coming into your life that Daniel's going to speak against, or a storm of problems problem people that are going to descend upon you. So resist that urge to spiritualize or turn it into an allegory. Just take it as Daniel saying that he sees a storm coming, and he's speaking in language that is reminiscent of things people would have said about Baal. And we're going to stick, as been my habit, to stick with the literal meaning. That is, we don't disregard clear figures of speech, but even when a figure of speech is used, we know it's trying to communicate something literal and concrete to us in a vivid and visual language. So we'll stick with the literal understanding. You should too, as you move through the book of Ezekiel, and I hope you do that in the Word, the daily in the Word. When we come to chapters 1 through 4, you're going to encounter several things, right? So first, you're going to see this overwhelming vision of God's glory and sovereign power. The whole 4 chapters are this vision of his glory and power, different visions he sees. And it's really hard. I'll give you a warning. It's going to be hard to comprehend, hard to imagine what he's looking at here. But these vivid, startling visions of God's glory are not unique to Ezekiel. Don't dismiss Ezekiel saying, well, he's weird, or there's something particularly unique about this that's not true of the other prophets. Moses, Isaiah, Daniel, and the book of Revelation, John, all had these incredible visions of God's glory. Moses sees this bush on fire, but it's not consumed, and he hears a voice that tells him, you're on holy ground. Take your sandals off, Moses. Isaiah sees God on his throne with angels all around him yelling to one another, and Isaiah is just undone. Isaiah is overcome by the holiness of God and confesses his sin in the sin of his people. Daniel likewise, and of course John falls down dead, as if dead, at the vision of the glorified Jesus. So they all had these incredible visions of God's glory that kicked off a significant prophetic ministry. And, we also consider, although it didn't kick off his ministry, we can consider Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, where he testifies that he knew a man who went to heaven, probably Paul speaking of himself, that saw such incredible visions he could not speak of them. So again, when you go through chapters 1 through 4 of Ezekiel in the coming week, let's not dismiss him because it's hard to comprehend, hard to understand, but let's receive and read the revelation that's been provided to us and try to understand it from the perspective of the original hearers and readers. Once you get through those first 4 chapters, then you'll move into, or 3 chapters, you move into this long section of judgment on Judah that's coming. So we see these signs and sermons I talked about before in these first 7 chapters, in these chapters 4 through 7, and they all have this same theme of affirming the certainty of the judgment that's coming on Judah. And then when we get into chapters 8 through 11, it's going to comment on that judgment, and it's going to give, say, the past sin, the background of the judgment, the past sins that have resulted in this. So it'll talk about the desecration of the temple and his ministry, and its ministry of the temple. You're going to see the condemnation of the princes and priests, in other words, all the remaining leadership. And we've seen throughout the book, and it's going to continue as a theme right into the New Testament, that as the leaders go, so go the nation. They lead the nation, in Josiah's case, to godliness, or to so many others, Zedekiah, Jehoiakim, Jehoiachin, into destruction. And we'll see those priests and princes being condemned. And then we'll see the withdrawal of God's visible glory from the temple in those chapters. And then the section will end. You won't get through, I think you'll get through chapter 17 in the coming week. It'll end with kind of a laundry list of the causes. So we'll see that the prophets are lying. They're counterfeit prophets. They're lying and misleading the people. And again, even though they have lying prophets, the people are held accountable. They should have looked at God's word. They should have checked these prophets out. They're going to be judged because of idolatrous and unqualified elders. Again, these are the men who are supposed to be leading each of the tribes and each of the clans, the repositories of wisdom in Judah and Israel. But they are secretly and sometimes publicly practicing idolatry, which makes them unqualified. Then the nation turns from the prophets and elders to the nation itself. God condemns it for fruitlessness. It's a fruitless nation, and God's going to condemn them because he never intended his people to be ineffective and fruitless in their ministry. Remember, Israel was supposed to be the way that the nations drew near to God. It was through Israel. They were to minister to those nations, reach out to those nations, as well as minister and reach out internally. But they did neither. So they're fruitless. It's a reason of judgment if a ministry or a church shows itself to be fruitless, shows itself to be not growing numerically and or not growing spiritually. And finally, they are condemned for their spiritual adulterousness. Adulterousness, is that a word? I think it is. but they're going to be condemned because they have gone after other gods, which are really no gods at all. We'll discuss that in more detail. So that's just what you'll be seeing in the coming week, focused on Ezekiel because you're going to be spending more time in there. So what? And what do we do now? Well, let me suggest a couple so whats and what we can do. So what is God always proves to be faithful to his promises in either judgment or blessing. So we can rest assured in the faithfulness of God that he is going to do exactly what he said he would do to both bless and curse. So this faithfulness ought to produce in us, not only in Israel in the past, should have produced fear and hope, but also in us as well, that we should have both fear of the Lord, fear in his fierce faithfulness, as well as hope, because we know that just as surely as he will judge sin, he will also restore those who repent and turn to him. And finally, God has always and always does provide revelation to correct and direct and instruct and excite his people into action. God always does that, and he does that even down to our own day, even down to this very moment as you read through his word, that his word is there to correct you, to direct you in the way you should go, to instruct you in what God is doing in the world today, and to excite you into action, personal action and corporate action as well. So this is the introduction to Lamentations and Ezekiel. God bless you, brothers and sisters, and enjoy your reading through God's Word in the coming week.